Hello everyone, and hi everyone who is watching the replay of our live session tonight. So I'm trying out these ear pods. Apparently it's supposed to make the audio a little bit better. Hi Carrie, can you hear me okay? I'm trying out these new ear pods, and apparently they're supposed to make the audio better for you guys, so I don't know, we will see. Anyways, I have a few questions to answer tonight. And then I also wanted to share with you guys just a little bit about kind of my journey and my story and how I got here to where I am today, because it has been quite the journey and certainly not what I expected. Also a big shout out to all of you guys that have signed up for the Academy. We had a really good lecture on Tuesday night about contact and connection. I think I made like 50 slides, which I really enjoyed making the slides. And hi, Lori. And for me, it's really fun to create these presentations about dressage theory, because I think that that's something that it's taken me a long time to learn, and that you don't necessarily learn by just taking lessons. So it's kind of another piece. And we have another lecture coming up on this Sunday. So for those of you guys who are interested, at 12 noon on this Sunday, I will do the same lecture again. So if you already went to the lecture on Tuesday, you're welcome to come on Sunday, but it is going to be the same slides. So hi, Sue Ann from Michigan. Hi, Lori. Hi, Joellen. Thank you all for watching. So for those of you guys that don't know, I do post a free video every Wednesday on YouTube. So this week I posted one on the halt. And the halt is such an important thing for us all to remember to practice. Tiffany wrote in a question about how to ride straight lines. And I think that a lot of us struggle like that. We go up the center line to start our test, and the horse is like a drunken sailor, just weaving all over the place. And a lot of times what happens is that we start trying to correct all those little things. So like the horse goes left, you turn it right, but then you end up too far to the right, so you turn it back to the left. So the best thing, in my opinion, rather than trying to fix all of those little wiggles, is just to look up and ride forward. So if I'm going up the center line, I look at the judge in the judge's booth. Usually when you go up the center line, the judge stands up just as a sign of respect to watch you enter the ring. So I try and look up at the judge, look in their eye, and then just ride straight forward towards the judge. And it's like your car, the faster you're going, the more impulsion, the more forward your horse is going, the more likely they are to go straight. If you don't have enough energy, you're going to be wiggling all around. So be sure to watch that video, because I do talk a little bit about that in the video. And I show a little bit with Kensington, my 5-year-old. He's super wiggly, and especially when I go into the halt, he like tries to wiggle around and doesn't want to keep his hind end behind his front end. So check that out, Tiffany. Okay, so Beth had a question about her horse kind of losing interest, and she was feeling like she was having to use more and more leg and spur to get her horse to keep going. And so she wondered what my suggestion for that was. Then she added that when she was riding behind her husband's horse, that her horse was suddenly going more forward. So this a little bit tells me that it's not so much that the horse is maybe losing interest as much as that the rider, like that the intention of the rider needs to change. So I have a few students with lazy horses, and I always tell them that it's really important the intention that they bring to the ride. So if you know your horse tends to be, oh, Beth, good, just in time, I'm answering your question. So Beth, I was saying that a lot of it is the intention that you bring to your ride. And if you know your horse tends to be a little bit lazy or unenthused, you have to really come to the ride like super pumped up and energized, and like, we're gonna do this and get it done. So if you come into the ride and you're like, oh, well, I'm tired and I don't really feel that good, and I don't know, do you feel like working? Let me know, because it's okay if you don't really want to work. Then your horse is going to just pick up on that energy and they're not going to want to do anything. So I would say the biggest thing is just if the horse will go forward behind another horse, then you know that the horse isn't in pain and they're not suffering in any way. So that's always a concern if they don't want to move forward, is maybe they're hurting or maybe they don't feel good. But in this situation, it just sounds like you need to kind of have the mindset of like, hey, we're going, let's do this. So I hope that helps. Emily says that she loves watching your videos, hoping one day to be presentable enough to take a lesson. So Emily, I just want to say that, you know, a lot of you guys, I know that you're shy and you feel maybe like you're not good enough, or that you have so far to come. But part of a little bit why I wanted to talk about my story is that we've all been there. When I first started out riding, I was terrible and I fell off a lot. And so I don't want anyone to ever feel like they're not good enough or that they're ashamed of their riding, because if you're out there and if you're getting on and if you're trying and if you're eager and if you're interested in learning, that to me is the most important thing. So I really don't care how beginner you are or how fancy of a horse you have. The biggest thing to me is your attitude and your mindset and your willingness to learn and be humble and work hard to make little achievements. So shout out to all of you that feel like you have a long way to come. So let's talk a little bit about my story, because I certainly started out really terrible. Like I said, when I first started riding, I fell off like all the time. Like I was fat and top heavy and the horse would just barely do anything and I would tumble off the front of it. It was so bad that my riding instructor nearly told my mom that I should quit and that, you know, I just didn't have it, and I really seriously had no talent. So I guess sometimes I wonder why I stuck with it. I think a lot of it was that I love the horses. I love the challenge of riding. And also as a kid growing up, I didn't really fit into, like, I wasn't popular. I didn't really fit in with the other kids, but I loved being at the barn. I loved the other kids at the barn. I loved hanging out with the horses. So I guess that is why I stuck with it. I have a few pictures to show you. So I don't know if you can see, this is Achilles. So that's my first horse. And I think he was like Hanoverian, Arab, and quarter horse or something. He was a really weird mix. And as you can see from the photo, he was very croup high. But I learned a lot from him. And even as a kid, my parents were super supportive, but I had to work really, really hard to earn everything. I remember that I used to work off my lessons, and we had these little time cards with my first riding instructor, Julie, and I would count up my hours with helping the younger kids, like grooming and helping them groom their horses and get their horses ready. So I would count up my hours so that I could pay off my lessons. And I started out leasing a horse. The first horse I leased was named Natural Disaster. And the first time I ever cantered him, he bucked me off. So I always was taught that I had to work for it and I had to earn it. And sometimes I was envious of the other girls at my barn, that their parents would buy them super fancy horses and all the right equipment and all the right breeches and everything, and I always felt like I had to really work for it. And today I'm so grateful for that, because I think that hard work and determination and all of that is such a huge part of this. So shout out to all of you guys. I know that it is hard to afford this sport. It's a really expensive sport. And sometimes it's easy to get discouraged and just to be like, well, I don't have the money and I don't have a good enough horse. But what's really helped me is that I always try to go back to just enjoying the journey and loving the horse. And certainly I have big goals, like I'd love to be on the team one day, but I also am really satisfied with the horses that I have and the little progress that I make and the students that I have. So I think that that's really important, is not to get bitter about what you don't have, but to always be grateful for what you do have. So here's another photo of me with Achilles, and that is my brother there. So he was always very supportive. And so actually when I got my second horse, Geronimo, then Joseph got to start riding Achilles. So that was a kind of a fun thing, and it's really fun that my brother rides and also my mom rides, so it's kind of a family thing. Barb says, how many horses do I own? I own 2 horses right now. So I own Harvey, who's 8, and Kensington, who's 5. Okay, so back kind of to the story again. So yes, Robin, it all comes down to the love of horses. Amen. So after I rode Achilles for a while, then when I was 14, my parents had this crazy idea that we would go to Europe and they were going to buy me a horse because I never wanted to travel anywhere. So that was like their scheme to get me to travel, was that we would go to Europe and we would look for a horse. So I came home with a 4-year-old as a 14-year-old, and Geronimo quickly started rearing. Like, he had probably the worst rearing problem ever. He would just, anytime that I would do anything, he would just stand on his hind leg. And it started from the trainer I was working with was trying to teach him to do a turn on the forehand, and he didn't understand and he got really confused. So he figured out that if he reared, then the pressure would go away. And the instructor that I was working with at the time, they weren't very good trainers, but they basically said that, you know, Geronimo was a terrible horse and my parents should get rid of him. They told my parents that he was like the equivalent of me having an abusive boyfriend. And so thank God my parents didn't listen, and we sent Geronimo to a cowboy named Larry Fleming, and he did natural horsemanship. And so he started riding Geronimo. And we actually had to ride him in a halter because he'd been so screwed up about the bit and the connection, and he was so defensive that Larry started riding Geronimo in a halter to get rid of this rearing problem. And he started with groundwork and teaching him to bend and teaching him to disengage his hindquarters. And eventually it got good enough to where I could start riding Geronimo again. But at that point, I kind of realized that I couldn't just go back to dressage. I had to understand this other piece of riding and training if I wanted to be able to ride Geronimo. And that was really hard because I was like 15 and I really wanted to go to Young Riders and compete and hang out with my friends. But I had to make the decision to do what was right for my horse. So I moved to the Western barn and I started riding in a Western saddle, and I learned how to do all of the groundwork, which I use today. So like the bending, the yielding of the hindquarters. I learned how to ride Geronimo, how to get him in front of my leg, how to keep him from rearing, which was a huge thing. And I also learned how to start colts. So at Larry's, my mom bought me like this $500 colt named Scotty, and I broke him. So that was the first horse that I ever started. So here's a photo. I don't know if you guys can see these, but here's a photo of Geronimo there. And there in the photo, you can see I'm in my Western saddle and I have a Boselle on him. So I'm not riding in a bit, because he really loved to go in the Boselle. So when I was at Larry's, I learned how to start horses. I learned how to deal with problem horses. And yes, Aiden says, I used to have a your horse is a bad horse trainer too. And yes, Aiden, it's hard to hear that from a trainer when they just tell you that your horse is bad. And usually that's not the case. Usually it's that the way that you're communicating with your horse is not correct. Yes, I will post those photos on my page, Shelly. So horses are like such honest and genuine creatures that they are never out to get you. So they're never trying to be bad or trying to be ornery or trying to take advantage of you or out to get you, because they're prey animals. So they're like very defensive creatures. They're not offensive. So if your trainer tells you that your horse is bad or they're evil or they're like anything like that, it's simply not true. You have to find a different approach. And with Geronimo, it meant that I had to kind of give up my dream of training a dressage horse, and I had to go totally back to the basics and learn how to be a better horseman. And I remember with Geronimo, he used to do this thing where when I'd take him to his pen and put him away and I'd take the halter off, he'd want to rip his head out of the halter and go like running to the other side of the pen. And, you know, as a dressage rider, I didn't really realize the importance of groundwork and manners and everything like that. So Larry said to me, he said, you know, it might take you 100 times, but when you put that horse away, he doesn't get to rip his head out of the halter and go running to the back of the pen. And, you know, Larry was so particular about all those little pieces on the ground. Every interaction that you have with your horse, especially a really sensitive horse like Geronimo, it affects the riding. So kind of learning those little details and learning the groundwork and learning the basics. At the time, I didn't realize how valuable it was. But now that I've trained a lot of horses and worked with a lot of young horses, those lessons that Geronimo taught me, even though I wasn't competing and I wasn't going to young riders, they're huge. And I learned so much from that. So, oh, here's one of Scotty. So that's the first horse that I ever started. And my mom actually still has Scotty today at her ranch in Colorado. So that's kind of a cool thing. Okay, so then when I graduated from high school, literally the day that I graduated from high school, I moved out to southern Colorado and I worked for a lady named Mindy. And Mindy is Buck Brannaman's sister-in-law. So Buck Brannaman is a big natural horsemanship guy. And I worked the whole summer for Mindy. And literally at Mindy's, I rode like 12 to 18 horses a day. And they were all young horses or problem horses. None of them were fancy. None of them were really trained in any sense of the word. But I learned so much from that experience. But I was only there for the summer, and then I went to college in Massachusetts, and I hated it. I was at Mount Holyoke, which is a women's college, and I absolutely hated it. So after the first semester, I moved back to Mindy's, and I worked for Mindy for another full year. And looking back, that experience was huge for me. I literally would get up in the morning at 6, clean pens, and then ride horses all day until it got dark. In the summer, I would ride up to 18 horses per day. And it was amazing because, for one, I lived there. I didn't have to drive anywhere. I didn't have to worry about clients or bills or anything. I just got to ride. And the more time that you spend in the saddle and the more horses that you ride, the better rider that you are. And I think that that's a lot of why I today have the skills that I have, is just simply that I've spent a ton of time in the saddle riding. So I have so much appreciation for Mindy, and she really gave me a huge opportunity to get to ride all those horses. And like I said, they were all green and they all had problems, and some of them were dangerous, but I learned a ton, and I learned how to break a young horse, and I learned how to deal with a horse that had never been touched. And she had this huge pasture, like a 2,000 acre pasture that we could go out and ride in. So I used to take Geronimo out in the moonlight on the trail and ride him out there and hear the coyotes. And it was truly an incredible year of my life. But I did work my ass off, and so that came to an end. So then after that, I went back and I moved back to Boulder. I moved back in with my parents, and I went back to college. So I actually do have a degree in biology, which I finished in 2.5 years while I was also riding and training horses. So I am a little bit intense in that sense, but I never thought that I would be a professional rider. I always thought that I would, be a vet or a doctor or something like that. But as I went through college, I was also riding client horses on the side. And when I graduated from college, I couldn't get a job with the degree I had. So I just kept riding and training horses, and that was still in Colorado. Then I did move out to California to work with Sue Martin, and she is an amazing trainer, and I learned so much from her. But I kind of made the decision that I really wanted to focus on dressage, and in California here there were so many good trainers and good horses that I thought I would bite the bullet and move out here. And it was really hard and really scary to leave Colorado and come to California, especially because I had no clients and I had no money. So when I first, Tiffany, you're riding with Sue tomorrow. Okay, say hi to Sue for me because she's amazing. But yeah, so I moved to California to work with Sue, and I had a really difficult horse at the time. His name was Trump, and he was a half thoroughbred. Here's a picture of Trump. Maybe you guys remember him. But he was like one of the most difficult horses I've ever had, although I did get him to the Grand Prix. So he was the first horse that I trained and competed Grand Prix. But moving to California was really hard because I didn't have any money. I had Trump and I didn't have any clients. So when I first moved here, I was actually living in this tack room at the barn. And it was like really sketchy, but I think that I made a lot of sacrifices to get education and to give myself opportunities to learn and to become the best rider that I could be. So when I moved out here, I think that there's this misconception that people are going to, just sponsor you or give you a bunch of really nice horses to ride, and that's not the case. So I started out with all unbroke horses. When I came to California, I started working for a breeder, and she had this pasture with I think like 6 or 8 unbroke 3-year-olds. So that's what I started my business on. You have to get them halter broke, and then you have to put the saddle on them, and then you have to ride them. And it's really hard work to break a young horse and to do all of that. It's very rewarding, but it is really hard work. But like I said, learning what I learned from Mindy and dealing with all these problem horses and breaking horses is what has given me the foundation now to be in a place that I can help you guys and that I can explain to you guys how to train a horse and how to be a better rider and how to be a better horseman and how to communicate better with your horse. Part of what I don't like about dressage is that I think a lot of people say that you have to have a trained horse and you have to have a schoolmaster if you ever want to learn dressage. But that's really not a realistic thing for most of us because, for one, most of us can't afford a really nice schoolmaster, and for two, there's not a lot of them out there. So you really have to try to ride the horse you have and learn from the horse you have and really have this hunger for knowledge. And one thing that I will say throughout my whole career is I've always really tried to prioritize education and learning. I've had some amazing teachers throughout my career, And I remember as a kid, getting DVDs of people that I admired and just watching those DVDs over and over and over again. We're lucky now to have resources like YouTube and Facebook and so much live streaming content, and that's really amazing. But definitely taking advantage of every opportunity. So like Tiffany said, going and auditing a clinic, you can learn so much by just watching, even if you can't afford to ride in the clinic. Watching YouTube videos, riding other people's horses, having other people ride your horse. So yes, Paula, we're lifelong learners. And anyone that is a true horseman and a true dressage person really enjoys the journey and the learning part of it. So it's not all about, winning a ribbon or being the best. It's just about having a partnership with your horse and making those little baby steps. It's like the little things, when you feel like you can trust your horse and when you feel like a transition happens really well. It's those little things that make the difference. Aiden says you can learn something from any horse you ride if you listen hard enough. That's so true, Aiden. And horses also, they really are a reflection of us. So whatever problems that you have with your horse is probably something deep inside you that you're struggling with in some way. And that's like, I know that sounds kind of voodoo and kind of weird, but it's so true. Like, we create our horses the way they are. And I know with me, I tend to be a little bit too intense, a little bit too uptight, a little bit too strict, and I create that in my horses. So anyways, I guess fast forward to today, I have two amazing horses, which I'm so lucky to have. So I have Harvey, who's 8, and Kensington, who is 5. And last year I sold my horse Gatsby. For those of you guys that remember him, he was an amazing horse. I bought Gatsby when he was 4, and he was pretty unbroke and kind of green as a 4-year-old. And I trained him up to the I1. So I showed him through the I1, and then I sold him as an 8-year-old. And I love doing that. So what I love more than anything is getting a young horse and developing the horse. I think that really is the beauty of dressage, is training them. That's what dressage means, is training. So taking a green or a young horse and then developing them up the levels. And then with Gatsby, I kind of felt like he was maybe not going to be like my Olympic caliber Grand Prix horse. So I made the difficult decision to sell him. And that's always hard, to sell a horse that you've ridden for so long and that, they're really a part of your family and a part of you. And so that was a hard decision, but it allowed me to get another young horse, Kensington, who's 5, and he's really amazing. So I'm going to be showing him and Harvey and then Natasha, a client horse who does the Grand Prix, next week in the championships. And so I've always felt a little bit, part of what I don't like about dressage is how elitist it is and how expensive it is, because I think that can be really discouraging. And that's part of why I do this for all of you guys. And it's part of why I make the YouTube videos. It's part of why I, do these live streams. It's why I try to answer your guys' questions, is because I want to make dressage more for everyone. And I want it to be like, I've always worked my ass off. Like, I work 7 days a week. I don't think I've ever really taken a real vacation. Like, maybe on Christmas I went to visit my grandparents, but I've never gone to Hawaii and laid on the beach for a week. I'm very frugal with my expenses. Like, I don't go out to eat. I don't, drive a fancy car. I live in a tiny house. But I've done all of that, and I've worked so hard because I love my horses, and I want to have good horses, and I want to learn to ride better. And so I've really geared my life towards that. But that's part of why I do all this and put all this educational stuff out, is because I want it to be more accessible to everyone. That if you work hard and if you study and if you audit clinics and if you watch these videos and if you ask questions, that you can get there and you can become a better rider and you can make progress with your horse. So that's kind of my big picture view. And then as far as my two horses, so I own them both. You know, I do have a few horses that I show and I get to ride for clients. I used to always think that like magically one day that this sponsor was just going to fall from the heavens and buy me a bunch of nice horses to show and compete. And I think we hear a lot about that happening in dressage, but so far that hasn't happened to me. So I've always worked really hard to save my money and buy a good young horse and then train that young horse up to as far as they can and then sell them, like I did with Gatsby. I bought him as a 4-year-old, I trained him up, and then I sold him, and then I reinvested into a younger horse. Now, it doesn't always happen that way. Like Trump, for example, I lost a lot of money on him. So it's not really a good business model to think that you're gonna make money off of your horses, but certainly if you know how to train a horse, you can buy a young horse and train it up. And that's really been my model for getting the horses that I have and having the horses that I compete. So yeah, I am looking a little bit into trying to maybe syndicate a horse or do something like that where I can get some more support for the horses that I have to really be able to campaign them and compete them, because it is expensive. But there are also a lot of great programs out there. Like Lori was asking about, there's a developing horse program. So hopefully Harvey will be a part of that through USEF, where they support like your training and help you get to the competitions and get some more opportunities. But those opportunities are kind of few and far between. So I think I've gone on enough about my story. It's always a little bit hard. I don't really like to talk about myself or to talk about my story. I'd rather spend time helping you. But I really hope that this story gives you guys some encouragement. And, you know, I certainly started out with no talent and I had support. My parents were very supportive, but it wasn't like I had, you know, nice horses falling from the sky. I never had a super well-trained schoolmaster that I was just able to sit on and do all the movements and do the Grand Prix. So I really learned from the bottom up. I rode a lot of green horses and rank horses and horses with problems. And I think that that is a lot of what has given me the skills and the knowledge and the, just the tenacity that I have today. So anyways, thank you all for being here, and I hope to see some of you on Sunday for the contact and connection lecture, because it's not too late to sign up for that. And that was really fun to do. I had, I think, 50 slides, so I might try and shorten it a little bit for the one on Sunday. But it was great to see many of you, and I hope that you guys enjoy as much as I do kind of learning the theory side of dressage. So good night, everyone. I'll see you here next Thursday.